Welcome to another episode of the Bandwagon Podcast, and today is a little bit different. You would have seen on New Year's Day that there was the story that was breaking for everybody in the UK around the whole post office scandal, what's been dominating the headlines. So today we've got a guest with us who's going to be able to just give their account in terms of what happened and how this whole fiasco and this farce basically had affected him and the family around it and the people around him as well. Um, for those who don't know or probably listen from around the world, believe it or not, we get listeners from just outside the UK or people who watch this. I'll just give you a kind of a brief synopsis of what I've understood to kind of happen. So at this moment in time, the Horizon Post Office scandal, and this is in early January 2024, has been described as the biggest miscarriage of justice in British history, with over 700 wrongful convictions. So on New Year's Day, as I was just mentioning earlier, a TV program broke on ITV and basically explained the story of the post office scandal and how people have moved and taken it to court, and it took it up to a certain point. So today we're going to just give it a little bit of in-depth from there. So the guy who was heading that up was a gentleman called Alan Bates, and it was Alan Bates and Postmasters who took the post office to court and won. So a bit of context now. In 1990, ICL Pathway, which was a subsidiary of Fujitsu, so that's like a mini company within another organization, built this software called Horizon. And the idea of that was to have, when people were getting their benefits, was to be paid via kind of swipe card. Now, earlier on in that process, people realized that this software wasn't working very well. And so the DWP, so that's the Department of Work and Pensions, basically rejected it. But the post office went ahead and said, yeah, this will work for us. So in 1999 and the year 2000, this is where Sub Postmasters. So Sub Postmasters are the people who run a kind of a franchise of the post office, started reporting problems, and they were getting accused of stealing money because on their system, losses started to appear that the money wasn't counting up or coming through. A helpline was then made. So they knew it was up to a point that a helpline had to be made. And they didn't disclose that there was a lot of people facing this. And when people were ringing up, they were saying that it was only just one person. You're by yourself. It's just your problem at this bit. And then switched it on them by accusing them of stealing or doing fraud or doing dodgy accountancy. And then where people couldn't pay back those losses, which they didn't incur themselves, they took them to court and prosecuted them, and some people actually went to prison. So the post office, because of an old statute law, didn't really need to have police investigations done at that time. They were able to take it to court and prosecute. So some were overturned, but the post office, in essence, had virtually no evidence. In fact, there was a guy called Michael Lingdon who's in this ITV drama, who worked for the post office. Actually, went to the Fujitsu headquarters in the UK and actually realised that workers at Fujitsu could actually overturn and mess around remotely for the figures on the Horizon software. So then the gentleman I mentioned before, Alan Bates, he coordinated with 550 other postmasters a new alliance, a group basically being supported by a bunch of lawyers who were getting some investors of organizations to kind of support them, and they actually kind of joined up with this group called Second Sight Lawyers, who in effect helped win the case, but there were still convictions going up until 2015, and the judge at that point turned around and actually accused the post office of actually being evil. Now, where this comes to and where we're going to kind of go back and forth within this was that the law firm actually won 58 million pounds, and that was the actual sum. However, they had to pay 47 million back to those investors of that law firm. So in essence, the 550 people who were with the Mr. Bates actually got £20,000 worth of compensation. But when you consider that the people are having their reputations, families destroyed, suicides, no amount of money is going to be enough to bring those people back, or the pain and the embarrassment that they suffered. And it's culminated in this week, which is around the 10th of January, where the ex-CEO Paula Reynolds, who was supporting, who actually got honours of the charity work and support for the work she did within the post office, actually had her honours stripped off. And Rishi Sunak at this point had fast-tracked a law to help exonerate those wrongful convictions and speed up a compensation package at this bit. And now we are facing Fujitsu and the post office being taken to court for potential fraud as well. So I know I've said quite a lot there, and I just want to give you a bit of a context of the story, but I want to bring it down into a personal story of somebody who was actually affected and part of this process, and his family was part of this process. So today, without further ado, welcome to Onkar Sandhu to the Bandwagon Podcast.
Thank you. How are you doing today?
Onkar, from in terms of what I've just said there, was that kind of summarized okay to this point?
Yeah, I'll say to this point, because each person's experience varied. And it seems that listening to the investigator that was on the select committee yesterday, the select committee on the public hearing yesterday, he seemed to highlight that each case was justified because it was slightly different, or each sub postmaster was doing something different to try and justify his investigations. And then when I'm looking at our examples, this week in particular, I've never really given it much bandwidth to sit down and really think about things. Then this week, me and Mum have sat down and we've had a conversation, we've looked over what used to happen in the past, and we just looked at each other and thought, this has happened to us. And it's like that epiphany, so we kind of knew it could have done. Over the years, you keep putting it in, you keep correcting it. And when I spent the whole week just trying to find where I know we've put it in, records I've kept, things that predate my dad's passing before I took over the family business, which are a bit harder, but we've got a rough figure in our heads. I'm still working through it now. Mm. So it's just the start, I think. I think the program's helped bring a lot of people forward.
Yeah. So were you before the program, or before it became to kind of attention, when you're, just tell us a little bit about life working within the post office as a family, and then we'll kind of make our way up to there.
So it started the year actually. So in the early 90s, another family in our village had the post office. They were retiring, so they approached Mum back then and said, "Do you want it in your shop?" Mum and Dad say yes, because back then it was a thing. If they're offering it here, and then it was a good salary to add into the shop, and it all, for years it went well. And then obviously we had a couple of issues along the way, but generally it went well. So we had an old postmaster who worked for the post office, who came over to work for us part-time. Then we had another guy came and worked for us, and we've all at some point in the family worked in the post office, in the shop, in and around the business, and it's always been a part of us. And then over the years, when more issues were occurring, it started to cause problems within the family, unfortunately. And as children, I can remember specifically Mum and Dad either arguing about it, not talking for days or weeks on end, because Mum saying to Dad, it's not balancing. They're at work till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning trying to balance. The staff member's being there, he's got to be paid, trying to figure out what's going wrong and why it keeps happening. So eventually, Dad's got to give Mum the money to balance it, because you can't not balance it. So you'd balance, and then how many times that happened over the years is kind of what we're trying to get our heads around to figure out the total amount. But that went on for years. And then when I took over from Dad, I've had myself, I was managing the shop and the store and the post office at the same time. It happened to me a couple of times as well. So it's just trying to reconcile it. What's his problems? Because you're looking at other people around you, and Dad would have looked at Mum, and Dad would have looked at Mum and thought, well, what are you doing? Either the staff are taking it, someone's taking it, because you're trusting the system's going to be right. And I've done the same thing. I've looked at the staff. I've looked at them for what the hell's going on here. So I went to work on Monday and apologised and said, like, I didn't realise how much this could have impacted. So it's caused tension and friction over the years.
I just want to go back to your dad. So just trying to like drill it down for us in terms of the basics. Then, so your dad, you do a day's taking or something like that, right?
Yeah.
And your mum and dad would be in the post office in terms of accounting. So what would they be looking at? A system to tell you what the actual price was? Is that what the balance was?
Yeah. So before Horizon, it was an old-fashioned accounting software in MS-DOS. That was bomb-proof. To the penny, never any issue. Over to Horizon, daily and weekly, you'd be balancing, and then mum and the guy that she worked with from the post office would balance, go to dad and say, "Well, this is the shortfall now," and that's what was happening. So each week, so my dad never actually worked in the post office. Mum did all that, but she'd be balancing with her staff. And periodically, they'd be looking at each other and asking, and it used to be, and it's every Wednesday we used to have to roll over. So you'd have to declare to the post office, this is what the issue is. Or this is your balance. Penny up, penny down, £10 up, £10, that kind of thing. But that's just that was a reconciliation of the stock you've got, the stock you sold, the money you should have left, all correlated in that one place, which was the Horizon system.
And then was it pretty early on that, from what you remember, as obviously because you're much?
So our main issue happened in the first month we had Horizon. So in the old days, the post office would give you. So mum was appointed the postmistress. They gave us somebody from the post office to buddy up with her and to train her. She then employed somebody else who was recommended to her, who was a postmaster from somewhere else. So they worked together for 2 or 3 weeks. And in the first week, not a problem. Came to balance. It was a little bit short. Bloke from the post office said, "Not a problem. Don't worry about it. Just roll it over. We'll see what happens next week." Come to the third week, it was showing a discrepancy of £97,000. So mum rang up the helpline, spoke to the post office. Somebody came the following day, corrected the system, and off he went. So when I'm talking to people, I'm saying we're one of the lucky ones. So from that point, we didn't really give it any thought, any credence. And then we didn't think about it till it started to come out years later, what was happening to other people, about the smaller amounts we've been putting in over the years. But the main one was from the first month we had it. So from when we had it, that could have been us. Luckily, thank God it wasn't us. But that's our example then. And if they did that then, how many other people did they do that for?
And if you are able to disclose, do you know roughly how much the balances were then?
So that first month, it was 97,000 discrepancy.
So hang on, let me just read that. The difference between the balance and what was going on, right, there was a gap of nearly £100,000.
That was it by week 3. This is right at the beginning.
So okay, let me just get this right then, right? So there's a discrepancy of nearly 100 grand.
Yeah.
And there's only 2-3 workers within there, right?
There's only 2.
Two. So one's going to be looking at the other, thinking, "Hang on, something's not."
You know what? Yeah. Well, see, back then, to turn over that much physical cash in the post office, you would have had to have had the main post office in Birmingham next to the Godfather, that big, massive one. Back then, them kind of days, to have that kind of money physically there.
So Horizon must have knew at that point that there's got to be something wrong, right?
So when they reported the discrepancy, next day somebody came, corrected the system, zero balance, nothing. So we didn't have to put any money in them. The subsequent years after that, there, £1,800 here. And over the years, it totaled up. And it only ever used to be mum or the guy that used to work for her, an old guy called Brian, and then there was another guy after that called Frank. These were sold to the earth people you trust with your life. So you know it's not them taking it. You know it's not you. My dad doesn't know necessarily how the system works, but he's just being asked again and again, "I need some money to put in the till." Eventually, he's scratching his head as well. But somebody's, and it causes the tension, doesn't it? Everyone's looking at each other. So that original issue, so what I say to people, we are lucky that we didn't have to pay it back because they knew that it wasn't physically possible that it could have happened. So over the years, with the smaller amounts, totally blocked. So you'll hear examples of people have said the loss was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. That's where like 20, 30 odd grand, and then they're coming in and they're doing their audits. Where's the money? And you hear, and all the stories you're hearing about are similar to that. Whereas ours was, we just kept putting it in. We just kept balancing it.
So you've got as you're still, I'm conscious, obviously not to kind of get figures out at this bit, but you're still working through figures that you've even going dating back almost 20 years now in terms
so our accountants now checking back from when my dad first engaged in his services, what he used to record in the accounts as losses, up to the point when I took over, because I've got what I've recorded. I don't know what Dad used to declare or record, so we're trying to get as much evidence together as possible to go to them and say, thank you very much. Potentially, if it comes, it comes. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But it's just that feeling of, in your head at some point, you thought your wife's stealing from you, or your mum's stealing from you, or you're stealing from each other, because it's your money at the end of the day.
As siblings, as you're growing up, if there's a pound on the floor, you fight into the death because of it, right? It's war. But as an adult, knowing that your family, your dad, your mom, your parents, right, are trying to build up a business, they're also trying to bring up a young family, and then I know you kind of glossed over it, but that there's tensions between them because it can only go within there.
As children, we remember it in the back of our heads, it happening. We wouldn't talk for days on end. Go and wake your dad up. Go and tell your mum this. You don't think nothing, no. But as an adult, when you married yourself, you know what that means, don't you?
Yeah, well,
you know what I'm saying? It happens to us all. But then when you think about it, and you think that was the cause of it, we're a microcosm of this problem. Think about the people now that are in the program that you've been talking about, or that you've heard about, went to prison, or lost everything. And this is why I say we're lucky, because we didn't get prosecuted, we didn't lose or have to go bankrupt or have that kind of problem. But it's the mental toll it takes on people individually and their families. So people will have sacked employees as well because of this.
Yeah, exactly because as a couple you're going to back each other as a husband and wife, right? And all of a sudden then you're not sure about the staff, and then you start building up a little bit of doubts within who you're going to do, how you employ, and then your relationship, whether you say you're an angel or not, I don't believe that works within there, right? So how do you then build up that reassurance that everything's fine? Do you know what I mean? You like, how do you keep that camaraderie, the culture within there?
Right, you just broke up then. Just say that again. Sorry.
I was just saying, between husband and wife,
okay, yeah.
you can still have a working relationship in when you're at work, for example, right? But when you've got staff and you know that you're second guessing them, you're not trusting them, that's going to take on its toll within it.
Yeah. So I get where you're coming from. So let's say the problem happened last week. You've checked everything, you've done everything, you checked cameras, you've checked your transaction logs, you've checked everything you can possibly check. And you come to the conclusion that they've been with you since day one, right? And you know what they're like, the personality, the people they're like, you know what their lives are like. And then as time goes on, you don't forget about it, but it doesn't become so forward in your thought process because nothing else has happened. Problem is, when it happens in 18 months' time or 2 years later, you go through it all over again. And I'll give you one example now. One of the staff that took over working in the post office with me when I took over, she was with us. She retired just back in the last year. She was with us for 18 years. She was with my dad when he died. That's how close she was to us as a family, as a friend as well, and as an employee. And at some point, you're looking at that person thinking these things because of these people, what they've done.
But even to the point that when your dad died, there were still those losses happening within the system as well, isn't that
Yeah,
right?
yeah. So they would class it, or I would class it as your micro dosing your own accounts. So let's say it's come through £250 short. Where is it? Don't know. You've checked everything. You've done everything. You either tell them that you're carrying a loss. They're going to take it out of your wages anyway, so you put it in. So at that point, there were little rumours and murmurs about right, people are having problems. Dad didn't really think too much of it, so we left it. And then over the years, as I've become more aware of the problem, it's only this week I've really just looked and thought it's us as well.
Did in terms of, when your dad kind of like, obviously I'm not speaking for him in that at this point, but like he doesn't really want to advertise the fact that there's things going on in there.
Of course you don't.
Yeah, so he's
Yeah,
keeping that trauma as himself, as a married couple, as a family, as a business.
yeah. So even to this day now, if let's say something happened today in the business, I tell the staff what they need to know to do their job about themselves and about what we're doing now, what's going on the shop floor. If there's been a problem and it's cost us £1,000, I'm not advertising the fact to the staff. A, you don't want to give them an opportunity to potentially exploit that, and B, you don't want to put that stress and pressure on them either. So you kind of do it yourself, really, don't you? That's what he did.
And he passed away,
Not
not even
knowing.
knowing, not knowing.
Yeah, yeah, correct. Which is galling in itself that he's had these thoughts and not had the resolution that I've now got and that my mum's got now, and that other people are getting. So that's the thing that's really irked me. This week I've been addicted to listening to everything, trying to listen and absorb as much as I can, people's stories, information about the case and what's been going on in the trials and all that kind of that I've not known before. I still can't watch the program.
You still haven't had time to kind of process it in, well, because
Yeah,
you got history. You've had your whole life rewritten for you in a week.
in that microcosm, yes. So I had a phone call yesterday. Actually, after you rang me, I had a phone call with my doctor. He had the same problem. It's very similar in terms of husband and wife operation. Very busy post office. They kept putting it in, kept putting it in. Had the audit. Said it's short. They put it in, and then they sold the business eventually. But then he's watched the program, and I said to him, Judge, it's you as well. But I'm going to send you the form, go through it with Judgy, see what they say. I can remember him talking to my dad about the same thing then as well.
So is there somebody who's reaching out to you to go for it from them, or is it how's it?
What's happened is I've reached out to Mum's Federation rep and said, this is what me and Mum spoke about. What should he said, based on what's going on, let's say before the ITV program, this is the process that's in place. This is the document, fill it in. There's a specific person within the Federation that's helping people with it. And that person within the Federation will go through your document with you and make sure it's as complete as possible and put it forward to post office for review. So that's what people are going to do. So it's not a process where, and this is where the government and the post office are complicit, because obviously, irrespective of the political party, the minister and the minister, and I forget the other phrase for the government person, but they've been hesitant to be proactive because they know it's going to cost them it's got to be touching hundreds of millions, whether it be compensation or repaying that money back. So that money, until this week, they have thought about doing it the cheapest way possible. Whereas if in the beginning they'd have spent the money they spent on litigation, which is hundreds of millions of pounds of taxpayer money, paid people properly to begin with, it could have been dealt with by now. Then equally, you wouldn't have had the hundreds of people now that are going to come forward. It's going to cost them hundreds of millions of pounds more still.
In the documentary, they go through and all various different kind of versions that are out there with people covering. They went to the extreme lengths of how they were monitoring people, in how people operate within the post office, whether it's actual posties standing still, this kind of huge pressure network of like optics and data around it.
Yeah.
So they knew that a lot of these things were happening at certain levels of that organization. What do you think's going to happen now to them?
Well, what I would like to happen, what's going to happen to things. And I'll say, in our lifetime, look backwards. You had Grenfell most recently. You've had what will now be another scandal that will become widely known about, the blood contamination scandal. They took 40 odd years to publicly admit what happened at Hillsborough. So basically, they waited till the people that could and should be prosecuted to have either died or not be able to stand prosecution anymore. How far back do you want to keep the Birmingham Six? How far do you want to keep going back to keep finding? When the Windrush, how they're doing that process. And when you look back and look at what could and should happen, every time you realise the government's got their hand on it. They spend money litigating it because me and you can't afford to spend the money they're spending to fight us to get our justice, which is what the post office have done to these people now. They've tried to outspend them. They've tried to keep them down as much as possible to try and get them to give up. And luckily for us, these people didn't give up because the investors you spoke about that pocketed the £48 million, whereas the 555 were left with about £5 million, about £20,000 each, was it?
Yeah.
People like that have realised there's something in this now. So they've got investments, fight it on their behalf because there's money in it. Money is what's driven it. So money's driving them, pay out the least amount possible now. And now it's got all this prominence. What should happen is in the disclosure, through the inquiry now, and with the parallel police investigation, they should find who knew what when and see there's complicit action in the post office, in Fujitsu, of people knowing and suppressing, which hopefully leads to legal prosecutions against individual people.
I know you briefly touched on it at the beginning here. You've spoken to other people. What are some of the worst stories that you've heard that in terms of from impact from this?
I think the worst ones are broadly known about in the media. The first time I heard of a gentleman, this specific person, was this week hearing about his story, which obviously may have been known about before. But it was somebody very similar to, say, myself, people that I know, who will have either inherited or have worked in a family business that's been built up by parents and grandparents, whether it be convenience stores, property, whatever it might be. And then at some point they've had a post office. This guy, in that example, had properties, he had businesses, and in one of them, I think he had a post office. Okay. Same process, there's shortages, they've come, they've done the audit. I forget the gentleman's name, but they've said, right, you owe us this. And through that process, they prosecuted him, and the racial disparity in sentencing has been evident. He had the largest sentence out of everybody for what is a comparable amount to other people who got far lesser sentences. And in that process, he spoke about his mental trauma, himself, his wife, his children, his mum and dad, lost all of his rental properties. I think he lost all of his businesses because of this. The amount he had to repay, forfeiture orders, seizure orders, having to sell everything. And as much as we like to say as modern junkies or Indians, what you say that we don't care what other people think, but when your name's been sullied, it weighs heavy on you. And that's almost a burgeoning thing. When a lot of my dad's reputation locally within our family, was the head of our larger family, if his name had been sullied or ruined because of this, then it would have destroyed him. And I can only think how it's making me feel now, how it made him feel then. That particular gentleman's story is one example of hundreds of other people as well. And that one really touched me.
Yeah, I was just saying, we just discussed it in terms of like trying to keep things in house, but rumors go out, it goes in the
Yeah, they
community,
do.
things are going on there, and then you lose trust. How much money can you put on losing the trust of a business with its customers?
Well, you
It's
can't. You can't, because what he said was, because the post office was closed, the retail business was operating within it. But because back then your footfall was a lot higher for the post office, it added benefit to your retail business. That took a hit. Then obviously it was reported what had happened to him. That had a detrimental impact because of the way people didn't trust the business. His wife was struggling to keep up running the business. Then it wasn't making enough to cover the overhead, so that had to close it. He lost everything from his reputation.
wow.
It,
Onka,
it,
honest,
it never gets
really,
easier, mate. It only gets heavier and harder. The more you
yeah.
hear from other people, it's shocking, mate.
And the thing is this is just the start of the story now, isn't it? And
It's,
how
it,
and how things are going to come out more and more. So I'm sure, if we spoke in 6 months' time, there's going to be so much other revelations that are going to come out,
will
and
be.
and
And
that
the thing that's annoying me is, so politically, current government, they know what's potentially going to happen this year in the election. They've looked at this as an opportunity to do something quickly to get a quick political win, in my opinion, because since 2019, this has been going about. At the same, we're no further ahead knowing anything majorly since 2019 to today. So what's different 2019 to today? The ITV program has put it in people's conscious and minds, and now they've realised, shit, yeah, that's a real quick win. If we do this, we'll look like the good guys. You're the same people that have been fighting them for the last 15 years, trying to put them down. Now, all of a sudden, you want to be their friend.
So just for people out there, is those systems still in place now? Like is that software, or has it been taken out? Or
No, right. So, this is a question I've tried to ask. So, I've been on LBC, I've been on Five Live, and I've tried to ask the same question. Nobody's given me an answer. So, if you can get an answer, I'd really appreciate it. How can I trust that system that Mum still uses to this day, which is Horizon, is correct? That it's not got bugs, that it's not faulty. How do I know that today? Because we've got a live issue right now that we're dealing with now to do with reconciliation of lottery. It's about 1,500 quid. So we're going through the process now of line by line, checking, ticking. Whereas before, I said to them, it can't be wrong. Just do it, pay it. Now, because of this, I said, no, get all the paperwork out, check it line by line. How do I know that's not the system again? But so far, everything we've done is correct. See, right now, today, the same system is being used. How do I, well, I'm not the postmaster, but how do the postmasters that are operating the system now know that it's not faulty now? Because you don't trust them, you don't believe them. So yeah, it's still being used right now.
wow. Onka, I really appreciate you taking time out for
No
this,
worries. I've got
and
one other one for you as well.
go for it.
Got it. So currently, Nick Reed is the person in charge of the post office, right?
Right. Okay.
So when I spoke to a journalist and asked him to look at his work history, right? So before post office, he left NISA, and his behaviour at NISA, which I've got experience of, because that's who our main supplier is, was found to have authorised the payment of bonuses which the board had voted not to pay. So he exceeded his remit in paying these bonuses. And when exposed by people, he was then asked to leave, which he then did. He's then gone to the post office and instigated a bonus culture, which he had done at his previous employer, into the post office, and then had to climb down from introducing a bonus scheme which incentivized people's compliance with the investigations, which is their legal duty to do anyway. So when he's already been paid part of this money, he's made this big thing about paying it back. It equated to about 7,000 or 8,000. His remuneration package, bonus toll, about 850,000. This person that's been lauded by some journalists as an okay guy is not okay. He's there to do his job and to maximise his earning potential at the cost of people that are working for him. And he's brought that culture there with him. And he is another example of somebody who, at other people's expense, could have and should have made more information readily available. Because today, the lawyer has said they have complied with, I think, between 1.9 and 2.4% of requests for data. So when your solicitor is saying, I want this data, that's the number of data, that's the percentage they've physically given over.
I just can't see where this ends. The more you think about it and how far it goes, and the emotional stress, the reputations, the trust issues around it, I just don't know how. I just don't know. I've got any words to kind of explain or kind of have any relevancy what you're saying.
Fortunately, however long you do your podcast for, this is the topic you'll talk about now. Let's say you talk to somebody else, and let's say in a year's time, you go back and review it. By that time, something else will have happened that will make you feel the same way. And it shouldn't keep happening. But it's going to happen. Something else will happen again. And it will happen again and again and again. And it will always be the same people being impacted by the same, and having it done to them by the same people. So that's where we are currently, unfortunately.
Okay, honestly, I can't say anything. Well, people listening to this, watching this, and will be fully supporting you on, how far we go and keeping people updated. But I really appreciate you taking the time out, and thank you, Onkar. I really appreciate it.
Thank you to yourself, and thanks for the opportunity to speak and let people know. Really, that's all we can ask for.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Cheers.